by IIT Bombay. So SINE started the Para series in the midst of pandemic, and in today's Para webinar, we are going to talk about the technologies that can be developed with the integration of AI ML in image diagnostics. We all have during the pandemic, we all have seen the changes in the healthcare sectors, and that has opened up the way for digital intervention in healthcare system. And technology is no longer an enabler in providing quality healthcare, but it has become an essential part of healthcare delivery. And digital transformation in healthcare is not new, but the pace of adoption during the pandemic has definitely accelerated. And AI is the most revolutionizing development in the healthcare sector or industry in the current decade. And diagnostic imaging having the greatest share in such development. And that is why we have invited 3 experts from this area to discuss on this, to address the opportunities, then challenges in this sector, to guide our innovators and startups who are working in this area, students, researchers who are interested to pursue this area or innovate in this area. So with this introduction to today's topic, I would like to introduce our today's guest speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker here, Professor Amit Seti from Electrical Engineering Department of IIT Bombay. He is also a visiting instructor of pathology at University of Illinois, Chicago. Before joining IIT Bombay, he worked as a faculty member of electronics and electrical engineering at IIT Guwahati as a management consultant at ZS Associate Chicago. He obtained his PhD in electrical and computer engineering from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with the focus computer vision and machine learning, and bachelor's in electrical engineering from IIT Delhi. And currently his research is focused on extracting valuable information such as for prognosis using deep learning on inexpensive medical modalities such as whole slide pathology, images of cancer tissue stain using hematoxylin or eosin. So his work basically on computer vision, deep learning and medical image analysis, so on and so forth. So with this introduction, I welcome Professor Seti for today's webinar. So our next guest speaker is Professor Amit Mehdirata from IIT Delhi, and it's my pleasure to introduce him. He's also a professor at AIIMS New Delhi. Amit Mehdirata is a qualified medical doctor from Dr. MGR Medical University, Chennai, and Masters in Medical Science and Technology from IIT Kharagpur. He also received his Doctor of Philosophy in Engineering Science from University of Oxford, UK, Research Fellowship in Radiology from Harvard Medical School, USA. Over the last 12 years, Dr. Amit has been involved in doing extensive research in the field of biomedical engineering, quantitative medical imaging, both at academia as well as in industry. And he has authored more than 50 papers in Journal of International Repute, and his contribution in the field of medical imaging and rehabilitative engineering has received multiple awards at various national and international platforms. So I welcome you, Professor Amit, for today's webinar.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is startup founder Sasank Chilamakutty, and Sasank is a founding member of QRAI, AI scientist at QRAI, and he's also co-authored of PyroTorch AI framework. His work involves deep learning on medical images obtained from radiology. His passion lies at the intersection of AI, healthcare, and open source technologies. And as a founding member of QRAI, he led and contributed to developing AI for healthcare. He's also instrumental in development of a neuro AI tool. And he's also alum from IIT Bombay, and he has done his BTech in electrical engineering from IIT Bombay. So I welcome you, Sasank, for this today's webinar.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome you all. So with this a brief introduction, I move now towards our today's webinar on AI ML. So I would request all of you to give some opening remarks and set some context for our discussion going ahead. But at the same time, we have a lot of students from IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay, and other IITs and research organization participants who register for this session. So I would also like to request you in your opening remarks, if you could also set a context for opportunities in this area and recent developments in AI ML, most current AI models which are used, and how IIT's vibrant research environment is supporting development in AI ML for image diagnostic specifically. If you could also highlight those points, it would be really good for our audience. So if you could get started, with Professor Seti, then Professor Amit, and then Sasank, that'll be really great. Over to you, Professor Seti.
Thank you, Pranita. And it's very exciting to share this stage with Sasank and Professor Mehdirata. So as all of you are familiar that in the last 10, 12 years, the advances in deep learning especially has made it now possible to analyze medical images with very high accuracy, and sometimes exceeding the accuracy of what a single human expert can do. But obviously we should take that with a grain of caution, with a grain of salt, in the sense that AI is only good if you give it very specific problems and you expect very specific answers. With that caution in mind, there are various ways of getting started, as many of you might already be familiar. The easiest way to get started is look for a lot of free data that is now available on several websites such as Grand Challenge, Kaggle, and others. And there are always challenges being organized in biomedical conferences such as ISBI, that is coming up in India this time in March. And so you need good problems, you need good data, and you need a good set of techniques and compute. So these four things that you need. And for techniques, obviously, you will have to do the hard work of reading papers, understanding the techniques, going to GitHub and understanding the code and so forth. And compute, at least to get started, lots of free resources are available either through Kaggle or through Google Colab. But then after some time, you would realize that you need more dedicated compute. So you can either go for a pay-as-you-go model like Google Colab Pro or AWS and so forth, or start working with professors or other collaborators who have their own GPU-based rigs, and you can work with them. So that's a way to get started. But I want to also set the expectations clearly that when you are working on medical images, the journey to put something out there that clinicians can use, and I think Sasank and Amit both can speak to this later, that journey is arduous and long, because these are AI engines or products or services that are going to affect people. So these have to go through a lot of validation and a lot of rigorous testing, as well as they have to be usable to the end user, which are the doctors. So AI is not going to replace the doctors, but hopefully it's going to make them much more efficient. They'll be able to do a lot more work in a very short time. So that is the paradigm that we are going with. As I mentioned, the limitation of AI is that it's not general intelligence. So it cannot think out of the context. It can only work within the context on which it has been trained. And then the next part of the journey is, let's say, if you do have something promising, there are lots of grant opportunities available, and SINE can tell you more about it, such as by various philanthropy organizations, as well as government organizations such as BIRAC and so forth. So that is, in a nutshell, the summary of how I think people can get into medical imaging. And now I'll hand it over to my other panelists.
May I? Yeah. Thank you, Amit. I think you have covered everything and nothing left me to give an opening remark, but let me phrase and agree with you on the same thing, but with different terminology so that it captures the wider audience. So I usually start saying that AI has a scope to see and comprehend information in your image or medical image, as the topic for discussion today is, which your eyes can't see. And that is where the beauty lies, that AI ML based image processing, diagnostics, screening, or whatever you want to call it, can help engineers, doctors, or community at large in doing the repeated tasks again and again, which any radiologist or a manual person would find it very tedious. And it can do the same task over a period of time without compromising the quality, where a radiologist might get fatigued and the output can reduce. But the output of AI, if performed very well, will be the same, whether it is working for 4 hours per day or 24 hours per day. But for the benefit of students and for the larger community working in this domain, I would say AI is a tool. It is not a solution. Many of the students or people working in this area always have an mindset or an attitude that AI is a solution to any problem which I give them. AI is just a tool. And trust me, it's a double-edged tool. It's a double-edged sword. As Amit was already saying, AI is something which you have given the power to the algorithm to do something and deduct the inference the output of that for some clinical context. But AI or ML or any such algorithm does not have a common sense. So the tool is designed to give you an output. It is mandated to give you an output. Whether that output makes sense to humanity or to a doctor or to me or no is human intelligence. It is designed to give you something. Whether you want to use it and is it sensible or is it completely illogical, that is what you have to look into. It will anyway give you something. If you put a junk data to train in, you will get a junk output, but you will know whether this is junk or it is actually useful. So the common saying in AI community working on medical imaging domain is the clinical team or medical image processing team who is empowered with AI is going to survive and deliver more compared to either the team who is not empowered with AI or only AI. So what I call it mostly is human intelligence plus artificial intelligence will be the way to go compared to either artificial intelligence alone or human intelligence alone. So take that message, and I think there will be a lot of limitation, open-end questions, a lot of research discussions that we are going to do in next couple of minutes. With that, I'll probably hand over to Shashank to get started.
No, thanks for that. Thanks for that awesome introductions, right? And honestly, I'm super happy to come and talk here. I mean, I'm from electrical engineering, IIT Bombay as well, by the way. I have been doing the same thing for years, and honestly, IIT has taught me this whole thing. Like I was talking to Professor Suyesh Avate, so he was the one who actually taught me medical imaging, and I literally showed. I talked to him about a few months back, and I told him like how your algorithms, whatever you have taught me, I was showing to some CEO or CTO of some X-ray CT manufacturer and told him like you guys are doing bullshit. Like you guys should copy the algorithms from here. So that, I'm super indebted to the whatever I have been taught here, and it's really cutting edge. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So now, having said that, I think learn all the cool stuff that you have been taught here to get into this space. I'll be talking more about more commercial business translational aspect of this, the session, right? I'll be talking about, so the space, as professors mentioned, this space, like if you are trying to get into this, be ready for a lot of criticism, be ready for a lot of questions. I still don't have questions, and I still, as a company, we get criticized a lot. You're saying like people will say you're going to replace radiologists, seriously. So they are going to be ready for a world of pain, I would say. But it's a very exciting space to be in. It seems to be, I was seeing another video. This seems to be something that we Indians seems to be really good at, honestly, because it's very math heavy. It's fun. Space to be in. So there are a lot of hurdles to get in. Regulatory hurdles, clinical research. So one thing that is very important is that you have to realize that this space is very clinical research heavy. I think this is something professors were mentioning, right? you need to do proper clinical research, proper research trials, like things that you would imagine that would get published not in a not in an electrical journal or computer science journal, but more in a proper medical journal. So you'll have to do real clinical research, conduct clinical trials, get them published in real world medical, get them published in a language that is comprehensible to doctors, make them accept it. So that's the way to get into this space, especially once you have developed the prototype, right, of the algorithm. You'll have to start publishing in these kind of journals and start thinking more like put a doctor hat. And even when you develop the algorithms, I think this is very important. Even when you develop the product, it's very important to think like a doctor. It's very important to understand what are the things that they care about when they see the scan, when they see the medical image, when they see the patient, right? You need to understand what are the factors that they think through. And it's important that you code them up into your algorithm. Like for example, one of the best examples is you are looking for a fracture, for example, right? So you also are looking for some trauma around the fracture. You are looking for edema around the fracture to confirm that there's a fracture in here. Those are the kind of knowledge that you'll have to imbibe, even though you are an engineer. You are like, when I speak to a neurologist, I speak exactly like a neurologist. Yesterday, there was a case presentation on status epilepticus. I was asking them what are the neuroprotective agents and how are they different and how are they affecting stroke care, how are they affecting like edema, right? Those are the things that, you really need to become. For example, another question is, what's the difference between tenecteplase and alteplase? So I start speaking like a doctor. It's very important you do this because otherwise you will never understand the product. As a product, you will never understand what those guys are doing. And there's always the gap between what doctors want and what you make. You don't want to make that gap. That is an important point, I would say. Apart from that, I think this over the time, in this session, I'm going to discuss quite a bit on the commercial, regulatory, and more practical aspects of these things. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Asang. So I think with that input, you are one of the translational. You have converted your interest in this area and converted it to startup and venture. You are doing that, which has spun out from IIT. So on that line, I would like to ask Professor Seti and Professor Amit here, since they are with academia, and they also mention about few points for students. So although, advances in foundational research are occurring very rapidly, which I understand, the translation to routine clinical practices has been slower. So this is one of the point, it has came out when I was discussing with Professor Amit Mehdirata. So what do you think, what are the challenges in translational research in AI for medical imaging? Since a lot of audience, a lot of audience here are from a research community or students, they would also like to know what are these hurdles and how they could overcome these hurdles. Professor Sethi and Professor Amit, if you could speak about this.
Do you want to go first, Amit? You're muted.
You can go ahead, Professor Seti.
Okay. So the challenges in taking research to translation, there are a couple of challenges that are there. The primary one being finding good medical partners who also have the time and the energy left. We have a dearth of doctors in India, diagnosticians in India. So they, if you talk to any radiologist or pathologist, they are probably going to be very busy with their caseload, especially if they are from a hospital where a good hospital and they have good and so forth. So they are very much in demand. So to ask them for their time, to ask them for their interest in actually solving a new problem, in looking at, in understanding research, in understanding at least basics of requirements of AI and so forth, and how to change the clinical workflow and so forth. That is, I think, the biggest challenge, number one. Number two challenge is getting good data. The data in most hospitals in the country, for example, is not well organized. A lot of our hospitals are not fully digitized. Pathology definitely lags much behind radiology in digitization. Even in radiology, and I think Sasank can probably give a more well-educated view on this. Even once you go outside tier 1 cities, even X-rays are still being done on films and so forth. Films are being digitized, if at all they are being digitized. So that entire data digitization, getting it into a fixed format in which AI can use, that is a challenge. And even when it is in a fixed format, then the quality of data itself can be a challenge. So these are some of the big challenges. And then after that, obviously, you need to do validation, which also requires significant amount of energy from different interdisciplinary stakeholders, as well as investment to take it to the next level, where it is where one can say that it is it has been tested and it is not inferior to, let's say, qualified doctors and so forth, and that can be used. Then the next stage of challenges is that AI is not very easily, automatically, it doesn't adapt to new situations. So if I have images from one kind of a machine and I have the same modality of images, let's say CT from another brand of machines, then a human expert easily adapts to the new machine, whereas AI does not. So that itself, one has to be very careful when you're applying the same technology in a different context, even a different set of population, for example. So all those challenges make it difficult to bridge the gap between something that works in your lab versus something that will work outside in the world. I think, let me have other panelists now weigh in on this.
Well, thanks, Amit. So let me put it in the answer this question with the limitations of AI and ML that this algorithms come along with. It's a package deal. So first thing, as Amit rightly pointed out, for any good algorithm to work reliably and repeatedly, you need a large data. It is based on what training it has received. So AI/ML is it's like a smart kid who has been taught from the day one a single specific task to do. And by the time he becomes an adult, he's trained fully to handle that one specific task. Now you put that person in some other task and he will not perform good. But he performs the task he's trained for over a long time. Very good. And that long time is the large amount of data any algorithm requires to get trained upon. Now that is very difficult to get in the current situation or in the real world. The data not runs in tens or hundred. Sometimes it has to run in thousands or millions. That kind of data we are talking about. Now, after that, even if you are successful in training it to an extent that it delivers what it wants, but still there is challenges regarding its acceptability by the clinical community. Ultimately, what you are designing is there to solve a clinical problem. Now, the clinician will ask you whether this has been trained such that it captures the variability that I encountered when I studied my med school for, say, 10 years throughout across the populations, across genders, across age, across ethnicity, across geographical variations, across normal variations within the human itself, or the pathological variations that can happen within the body. Have you accounted for all these variable factors in your algorithm? Because as a radiologist, my mind is tuned to that. I have seen that for 10 years. Is your algorithm tuned to that? If not, the acceptability is a problem. Because as Amit said, if you put it in a different environment, it will give you something, but whether you can trust on it or no, we don't know. Now, the last part There is a issues regarding translational research with AI in medical imaging. Shashank will touch it in more detail. The regulatory compliance, the IPR issues. Who will authenticate that this AI algorithm can be used for, say, detection of fracture or brain tumor? If that AI algorithm performs not to the level of acceptance by a clinician, who is accountable? Is the algorithm accountable? Is the person who wrote the code is accountable? Is the company who is selling it accountable? Or is the doctor who trusted that algorithm and did the decision on the patient is accountable? Nobody has answer to it. It is not an engineering solution that you are providing for industry. Something goes wrong and it can be corrected. No, you're talking about lives. Doctor is accountable for any decision he takes to take care of the patient well-being. Now, who is responsible in that case? So the trust, whether this algorithm can give me an outcome that can improve my clinical efficacy for patient care, that is what you have to answer in more details. Now, there are a lot of models available. The AI community has learned that the models are to be treated like an ad hoc. Model A works for brain tumor, model B works for breast tumor, model A does not work good for breast tumor, but model C does not work for liver tumor, but A and B combination can work. Now, A and B can be neural network, deep learning, anything. So there is no logical answer why this kind of model selection or in what parameters make them good to model particular pathophysiological variation good. Unless we answer that, the community is not going to accept it, because this is all real science. The AI has to adapt to what is happening in the body, not to just gauge it what could have happened and I will predict it. The last part and the most important, answering the large data itself, the gold standard. You are training the algorithm against something, right? And then you will try to validate it, test it, predict it. But what is your gold standard against which you are comparing? Are you comparing it with against some blood investigations? Radiologist personal subjective opinion, which itself might vary from a radiologist with some different experience or expertise over a period of time. And sometimes the gold standard itself might change over a period of time, over a period of, over the regions to regions. Now, what is your comparator against you want to beat your AI algorithm with? And the last, I would say, accept it or no, but the AI community who are actually the developers, they have to realize you need to solve a problem which doctors or clinical community is actually facing. Not the other way around, that I have a solution. I am coming with this package. Can you tell me what problem you have that I can solve with this? So that both the situations are different. You have to learn what is the problem that makes the clinicians or healthcare community easy, and that AI can solve. If you approach the community with that attitude, you have a window of opportunity, you might solve something. I am damn good at deep learning. I can do whatever you want. Tell me what problem you have. I would like to solve it. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so I think you have highlighted 2-3 points. Sasank, I would like to answer you this, but on the same line, I have one more question, so which you can combinedly answer here. So one thing is about that data set. I had this question next, but then we combined really here for the data set. So large data set, annotated data set, and the Professor Amit has already discussed about or briefly told us about this data, how variability which it should have in terms of quality. Now there is one more question which always these startups or students or early stage innovators have: the what quantity of data set they should train. So what number they should generally look for. And for Sasank, I have a question that being a startup, when you wanted to acquire this kind of annotated data, high quality AI ready annotated medical database. So what kind of a challenges you faced, and how important it was for you to have a collaboration between, practicing clinician and AI researchers, how that was for your startup and all, if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah. I think that was, I think good segue, because I think I can answer problems raised by professors, right? So we have like a lot of data. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
I will want to flex the kind of data we have. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
So, so this is the kind of data we have. So we have about 12 million. No, I think the total number of scans is about 12 million patients. The number of images, if you actually count, it's billion. And this is the different CT scans, like number of scans we have. About 1 million CT. The data, I mean, and this is the kind of expectation. Like, for example, number of radiographs we have is about 3 million. And this is breakdown. I mean, we have breakdown by different geographies, right? Breakdown by demographies, their ages, like different kinds of settings, whether you are acquiring it from trauma center or whether you are acquiring it from a stroke center or whether you are acquiring it on different centers. Like there are many different ways in which you can mess up. Whether you are acquiring it from a rural area, whether you are acquiring it from a urban area, because it matters a lot. Because you see, I mean, if you acquire all the scans from high-end tier 1 hospitals, you will never see tuberculosis, never reality. So even when you sample the data, it's very important that you acquire very generic kind of data sets, right? And it's very challenging to acquire this kind of data. This is like all the sources we have. It's not same. It's insane to acquire this kind of data. We startups make or break by this. We spend, and the best part about us is this was before all the AI and medical imaging hype, so we could acquire the data fairly straightforward way. Right now, it's actually a big barrier and a moat for us, honestly, to be honest. The fact that we have this much data and we can execute things really fast and quick, right? And in fact, the problems both professors mentioned, right? How generalizable we are. I mean, AI developed in one place might not work. This is something we faced like 4 years back already, 3 years back already, and we've kind of solved it by just acquiring a lot of data from different places. It's not trivial, but it has to be done to maintain sanity, to be honest, right? Because not only do we, so one thing that we do is not only do we acquire training data from a lot of places, we have this test data sets acquired from Vietnam, Philippines, India, US, UK, right? And we basically make sure that in each these places, our updates of models, right, are actually performing well on all. So we have kind of solved some of the problems, what's stopping adoption, specifically, like in fact, the gold standard, right? That's a great point Professor Amit mentioned. So for example, what's the gold standard we maintain? For example, you're trying to develop a TB model. Do you qualify? I mean, do you try to quantify its performance against a human with its own biases, or a biological test, right? A biochemistry test. So we ended up doing both. Right now we're at a stage where the model is able to outperform a human when compared against a biochemistry test, right? I mean, that sounds like a sales pitch. I'm sorry, but this is where we are. Now I'll come to the real, practical aspects, maybe even political aspects of this thing, which is stopping our adoption from reality. The thing is, for what it's worth, radiologists feel threatened by us. They feel that I'm out there to replace them. In fact, the study design, this is a tweet I have just sent in the morning. I was thinking about this a lot more. The study design is of proving that, yes, AI is cool, right? It's actually flawed. I mean, we have done clinical research. I have published a paper in the Lancet where we have compared AI to radiologists. Now, after 3 years of the publishing that, I'm questioning what's the value of that. AI is never going to replace radiologists. Now, why am I sending a message where AI is compared against radiologists? Maybe it's insane. It's not a cool thing to do. And I don't have an answer how I will alleviate that concern, but the messaging that's out there in the community is that AI is out there to get the jobs. And honestly, that is far from truth. And when it, I mean, and it's really honest thing to say, because I have actually attended a case presentation 2 days back. And it's insane to imagine a dumb AI, non-journalistic AI like ourselves replacing a doctor. It's like, imagine this, MR, there was in medical imaging community, and this is, I have researching yesterday. MR was actually was seen with a pessimism. MR was supposed to be replacing radiologists and clinicians. How far from truth, because MR, like the argument was, MR makes it so easy and obvious for doctors to look at the scans that they don't need a radiologist anymore. How dumb, because now MR is so complicated. Nobody understands how to do MR. I mean, how do you design an MR study? It's super hard. And a radiologist is there to guide them. And I imagine radiology will evolve in this direction where AI is just another toolkit. They have to know the limitations, the artifacts that come up and so on.
Yeah.
That is the real aspect of why we are getting stalled.
Yeah. So I think, Sasank, I think we understand the constraints here in this area, the challenges startup can face. But it is really the point here is like everyone would like to highlight here is it is important to work with clinician so that even to make them understand that this tool is going to be very important for everyone, specifically, for the healthcare quality, healthcare sector quality of, improving the quality in this area. So on that note, actually, I would also like to ask one more question is that, the Professor Seti and Professor Amit already mentioned here that the AI tool which you developed, and you should not have some solution and then go to the clinicians saying that, that I have this solution and then can it be used or something. But at the same time, how this seamless integration is possible, because this seems to be a very important, that seamless integration of any AI tool with existing clinical workflows. So do you have any pointers for that, any developing standards and common data elements for this seamless integration, because it seems to be very important. In COVID-19, a lot of, these solutions which were there for, for using AI and ML technologies, they have pivoted for detection of COVID and also how this is important, and any pointers and suggestion on that side. If Professor Seti and Professor Amit also could give us, some pointers on that. Say, Professor Seti.
Yeah. So for seamless integration, I think the most important thing is to not work in a silo. Work with the medical doctors, and sometimes doctors can be too close to a problem, so you may have to go a little bit above the doctor, to the business leaders who are employing the doctors, because they may see the problem across several doctors that they're employing. So it all depends on the context. Sometimes that seamless integration, ideas for seamless integration can come while working with doctors, sometimes going with the business leaders. And the third aspect is you can also think about going with the OEM manufacturers. So for example, companies that make the imaging equipment and the associated software. So doctors are already used to using that software. If you can develop something in collaboration with those companies that can fit exactly in the software that the doctors are already used to, then that could be a better way of driving adoption. But, I'm a researcher, so I think let's hear from Professor Mehdirata, who's been a doctor as well, and then Sasank, who has actually done some of these things firsthand.
Okay, thanks, Amit. I'll answer this question in 3 bullet points. Now, totally agree with the Professor Seti that you have to work with large clinical team with an idea that at the end of this journey, we want to integrate this solution in your clinical routine. If you do a research for a couple of years and then say, now I want to integrate in your clinical routine, you have already surpassed that journey that it will not be able to integrate. That commonality of the technical and clinical team has to be established on day one, so that they work together and understand each other work in so much depth that the integration of AI solution into the clinical workflow happens slowly, steadily, and by default, rather than it reaches a state of acceptance. Second, what are you actually trying to integrate the algorithm with the clinical routine? Now, let me give you some example. There are two different ways to answer that. Are you trying to give a solution to the clinical community for diagnostics, early detection, or are you going to give them a solution regarding screening? Both are different. You say that my algorithm or my training will be able to give a automated diagnostic system where radiologist has to click, yes, I agree. Right? Or it will be able to scan all the patients you have done in the morning to afternoon and triage the patients, that these patients seem to the algorithm more urgent. There, the outcome of the patient might be improved if this patient is seen before, diagnosed before, and treated before. So screen them, make them a priority, give them to the clinician to validate, authenticate, or do whatever they do best in that order. That will reflect as the best outcome of the day. Instead of he screening, scanning, or answering all the questions for all the patients and then delaying all the process where it could have been crucial on done that process early. So that is a seamless integration example. Last, as I said in the beginning, a smart algorithm, I am restricting all my discussion to medical imaging. The AI in healthcare is a bigger topic. So don't confuse me with that. So a AI algorithm for medical image processing is having a capability and capacity to analyze the image, which a radiologist sometimes cannot see. The golden saying of medicine is, I believe what I see. That is what doctors are trained from day one, right? Now, the sixth sense of a clinician develops over a period of time, which he sees and he feels, and then he takes the decision, right? But that is also a human limitation. There are no boundaries and foundations to AI, what it can see, what it can analyze. So if you give a solution to enhance the capacity and capability of current clinical standard of practice, there will be a seamless integration, because you are raising the bar of clinical decision making, what a human eye or a human factor cannot do. That would become with an easy acceptance, and that will be a seamless integration. So these are some of the things which you might want to focus from day one if you are actually looking for a deliverable product rather than a publication.
Right. I think there are a lot of questions in the chat box, but before going to that, just I'm going to have one question, which is on the compliance side. Patentability, how this could be on the regulatory framework or regulatory compliance, and data privacy. If you know, we can, all three of you could give few suggestions or pointers on that, how this can be done, like that right from the data acquisition point and all that, how it could be later we can make it regulatory compliant or something, about data privacy management, anonymity of data, all these that they're very crucial. So if you all three of you could give us some pointer on that, and then we can take up some question from the chat box.
Does anyone else want to go first?
I'll go first, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing you need to know regarding the IPR is algorithms are not patentable in India. Point one. Algorithms are patentable in US. In India, if you have an AI algorithm which you want to have your IPR on, if there is a hardware device which acquire the data and has a backend on which the working on this algorithm, either reconstruction or screening or post-processing, then the whole process of the device, design, integration, and AI, all packages patentable in India. Point one. The deep learning method itself is not patentable. Its application can be patentable. Now, the biggest question that I would also like to ask to industry or people who have done that journey and translated into products, maybe Shashank can answer. How do you make sure that the IPR retains with you? Because the knowledge of AI is so vast, a minor variation would not result in a very different output. And we care about the output, obviously. That's the concern. So how do you retain a barrier entry for any other person to breach your product and build their own one from a different approach? Now that's something very, very crucial for this community to realize the products, why they are delayed, why they are low, why there are less players in industry. On academia there are, but in industry at the ground level. So that is something, a much broader question, and maybe Shashank would like to take a stab on it because he has probably done that journey. So we'll go to Amit and then Shashank.
Okay. So let me give a quick IPR 101. So there are 4 different types of IPR. My wife is an IP lawyer, so I know a little. Obviously patents, but then there is copyright. So your exact software code can be copyrighted. So the code itself cannot be copied. But the idea, to protect the idea, you need to go to patents. And then Professor Mehdirata touched upon what can be patented and what not. There are other forms. One is trademark, which is not relevant here. But the 4th one is a trade secret. So trade secret means that you had everyone sign some sort of an NDA, and you had everyone sign some sort of a non-compete, and you made sufficient provisions to not disclose your methods to the public, and the methods were only to be used within your organization. If you do that, then you have some rights against the people who might want to steal that idea or take that idea when they leave the company or leave the organization and so forth. So trade secret is also one of the IPR methods, protection methods. Now, what is patentable and what is not, the laws are slightly different within, let's say, US and India. But by and large, there are ways around these laws by associating an algorithm with writing the patent in such a way that, the computer is part of that patent application itself, and you can describe the computer in a very general way, that it has a RAM and a processor and so forth. That way, even algorithms have been patented in both places. So there are ways to get around that. But coming back to the issue of what is a patent good for? So there are 2 ways of using a patent. One is offensive, the other is defensive. Offensive is that I don't want to allow competitors to use the same kind of algorithm. So that is only defensible when your algorithm is very, very specific, such as AES and encryption algorithm or something along those lines. Deep learning algorithms are not defensible in that way, because with a slight change in network architecture, you have a different algorithm that you can claim that it's a different algorithm compared to that person's algorithm that you may have seen. So that way it is not an offensive method, but it can be a defensive method in the sense that no one can come and say that you cannot use this algorithm if you already have a pre-existing patent in that area. But then that can also be protected using, for example, publications, or by using trade secrets, for example. So that was a quick introduction, but then the business aspects and the practical, I think Shashank can tell better on that.
Yes. Yeah, I think practically speaking, patents are unenforceable in this area. Practically speaking, I think while we do have patents, the defensively, just like what Professor Seti has mentioned, it's defensive. offensive is impossible pretty much in this space. In the software space, I think in general, having patents is really hard. You can only have, and the reality is it's very hard to steal as well. I mean, for what it's worth, it's very hard to steal your IP in terms of model. It's super hard. We are not in, so in the end, if you see the drugs, I think the patents, like a lot of people, when they think about patents in this space, they think of it as a drug. I mean, drug is a chemical compound which you can, I mean, obviously steal and make your own thing. And that's the sole process patent. Our thing is fairly, very difficult to copy unless you actually give them the model file. And even if you give them the model file, it's actually very, very complicated. So that is actual, I mean, in terms of patents. But having said that, that still does not solve the biggest problem. What patents or this IP protection tries to solve is the moat. You want a moat around you, which other guys cannot copy, right? The real moat are number one, publications. As I mean, that's the more softer versions of IP. They are the ones that actually matter. So how many publications you have matter a lot, because it's hard to say, I mean, it creates that moat, because why would somebody consider your competition if you have published evidence that your thing works, right? And this is something that's super critical to us. We have only 5 patents, or maybe counting, but we have 40 plus publications. We have a lot more publications that we focus and get. We have a team to get it done, right? We have a proper clinical research team to get papers out. So that is for us more real IP protection. And I think now, regulatory aspects, maybe I should give you a brief overview. So this is number one, moat around you is patents. Publications. But the even more challenging moat for any competition is regulatory approvals. It takes years and years to get regulatory approvals, and you cannot, the IP is such that if you got regulatory approval for X molecule, and if somebody is also creating that X molecule, you cannot use the same approval. That's the way in which drugs, this approval things work, right? FDA approvals thing work. That is simply is not the case here. You basically get approval for your own drug, for your own, model, and nobody else can use that approval as precedent, as the same approval for your product. And it's an arduous process to get approval. It takes about a year or so, at least a year. And even that, if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, it can take 2 years. And it involves proper investment to get this approval. This is the real moat for us. And for our competition, real moat for my competition, so that I cannot go and say, dude, I have a better product than yours. The thing is, I can, at this point of time, we have developed this product called a CT perfusion within 3 months. But the harder part is convincing my competition, convincing my clinicians that I have better product when the other guys have FDA approval. So that is real moat in terms of regulatory approvals.
Got it. Yeah, got it, Sasan. Yeah. So I think we'll take one question, a couple of questions from chat box. It's already around 4:54. So there is one question about collection of data, because it has come up as a very important point, how one should approach for data collection from medical centers, and whether these hospitals or clinics have repository of data which they can give it to you, or how should we go about it? That's like, there are 2 questions which I've combined. So Professor Seti, Professor Amit, and of course Sasan would like to answer.
So how we should approach collecting clinical data, is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, so it all goes back to building those alliances, building those collaborations with medical institutions. So think about it this way, right? So what is in it for them? They are already doing good for the society, saving lives. They are already making money also while doing a good job. So what else can you entice them to do that, that they should collaborate with you? They are already very busy, very overworked in this country. So either, you have to start with some strong credentials for them to take you seriously. So you should have started with, for example, some publications where you have demonstrated that you can get world-class results. And then on top of that, there has to be a commercial angle, or at least a large impact angle, which is well thought through about from end to end, not just the AI part of it, but how it will be used, in which use cases will it actually give you differential value, and so forth. If you can demonstrate all that, and that takes a consultative sort of quote unquote selling process, only then you'll be able to convince them to go through their own internal approvals, internal processes to collect data, to clean up data, and spend that much time to give you that data. And don't forget the importance of making them commercial stakeholders if you are going the commercial route in this space.
Any pointers from Sasank or Professor Amit, or otherwise we can take another question in the chat box.
Let's go ahead, right?
Yeah, so there is one more question on explainable AI in the chat box. So, I mean, it was a very long question, but I think the person would like to ask about how this explainable and interpretable AI is doing, because there is a lot of research which is going on this.
Let me summarize the question and also answer it. I have read through the whole thing, and I have very strong opinion on that. I think the argument goes like this, right? And the question goes like this. AI is today a black box. Nobody understands what's inside AI. And then you'll have to, if you ask any human about why they did this, they will basically answer you with an explanation. Can AI not be able to explain? And can AI also explain in why it has thought there's a dog in this picture, right? Now that is the main question. So given that, that's the background of explainable AI. Now, given the background of explainable AI, now the question is, can doctors trust our AI if it's more explainable? Correct? I think that's the whole crux of the question. And now I have very strong opinion on this. The thing is, now tell me, you think humans are explainable, and the reality is humans are not explainable. If you ask me, why is this picture Shashank? I don't think anybody will be able to explain why this is Shashank, or if this is, why is your face like Shashank, right? It's like, you just see the person and you say it's Shashank. You see the person and says Professor Amit Seti, right? Nobody explains, nobody thinks, wait, he wore some specs. He has a mustache, he does not have beard, therefore he is Professor Seti. No, nobody thinks like this. So explainable AI is pretty much a myth, who ascribe more qualities to human than they have. AI is not logical, by the way. I mean, it's parallel processing and it's not sequential processing. Explanation is more sequential and symbolic. Now, now that myth debunked, in my opinion, the more realistic solution, will AI get trusted if it's explainable? And the answer is no. There is in fact a how do you say it, trade-off between explainability and accuracy. Would you want explainable AI or accurate AI? I would always prefer accurate AI. I would never prefer explainable AI, because you are spending your AI energy, let's say that, on trying to explain things when you can instead spend it on actually making the right decision, right? So that's the, so it's actually myth. I mean, there's a paper on this. I mean, this is not my opinion, by the way. This is well published evidence on this, that this is the case.
Yeah. Got it, Sasank. Yeah, thank you for this. So I think there are a lot of questions in the chat box which are already answered by Professor Seti and I think Professor Amit as well. So I'm not going ahead with those questions because they're already there for the audience to look for the answers. But I think there was a question which about the images. Are there any repositories with the hospital available for the available for researchers who want to work in this area? That is actually one thing Yash is continuously asking, if somebody would like to tell something about that. Are there any repositories, or it is just open source data which is available? Yes.
Mostly the open source data. But if you're actually looking for large data, probably talk to Shashank. He has demonstrated on the website the data he holds. And in AI, data is the currency.
Yeah.
The more you hold, the more it is.
If you want to work on cool data. So actually, I will want to tell you repositories of data, right? So where you want to look for, I think this is a good, this is something that is not very obvious to many engineers. So a lot of clinical trials get done. I mean, on lung cancer, on stroke. A lot of clinical trials get done if they get a specific kind of intervention in, right? And they ostensibly share the data to you so that they can do some cool stuff. You can do some cool stuff, and it's ostensibly open access kind of science. This is all open science. But you realize when you go and talk to those guys, you will have to be very politically correct, because that data is not owned by one single person. It's owned by the set of people. But if you can get through that, that's a very rich source of data. You will like super clean data that is really conducive to develop AI. I say this, I mean, take my advice with a pinch of salt, because I was not able to execute this. I instead went and actually acquired data with a commercial contract, like what Professor Seti was mentioning.
Okay, got it, Sasan. So I think Professor Seti also mentioned in the chat box the sources of data, GDC, then Cancer Imagine Archives, and I think there are Grand Challenge. .org, Kaggle and all. So I think there is information from Professor Amit as well. Medical Image Analysis Society does a lot of challenges and give data for development. So there are various sources which you can go for collecting data for this thing. Right now, I think it's past 5, and then we probably have to wrap up. But with whatever the information which you have provided here on various pointers, there's one question always we get, and I would like to wind up the session with this one question: that how should we get started? We are being in the academia, and how should we get started? Now, I would like to answer part of that, and I would also like Professor Amit Mehdirata to answer, from other perspective, wearing a jury hat. How these applications, when they get evaluated at various levels, screening processes for when they come for various challenges and grant application. How that evaluation happens. So how should you get started? There's one option is that various grant opportunities which are available, because you need funds to start with, because you have that technical strength, because you're coming from IITs or research organization. So you have technical people around you. You know how to do it technically, but you need funds to execute this. So one way is to apply for various grant applications, such as Biotechnology Ignition Grant, BIG, the call for which currently open and will be closing very soon on Tuesday next week, 15 February at 5:30 p.m. Then there are other bio opportunities as well. For student, there is EUA, then Sitare, Sparsh Fellowship. Then there are Kickstart grant up to 15 lakh under Sitare. So these are some of the ways which you can go ahead and get some funding to execute your work. And with that, I would also like to understand from Professor Amit Mehdirata that how when you are being on this panel for BIRAC, what do you see in this such application? What do you think? What are the strengths which you are looking into this application?
Okay. Yeah. So it's a question like actually what Pranita is trying to ask is from the other side of the table. If you are evaluating the AI project or AI paper or AI tool for healthcare application, how do you see whether it is worth pursuing further or not?
Yes.
First thing you need to see is the team. Developmental team, clinical team, both. Whether these teams are strong enough in their respective areas. Do they have proved their capability and credibility in the area they want to pitch in? Both the teams. The source of data that is being projected, is that source of data realistic? is the number of data that is being projected is realistic to be acquired, right? And whether the data acquisition, testing and training and validation captures the homogeneity in the data that is required for training and at the same time captures the heterogeneity in data required to apply it on a larger audience. Both. And at the end, what are you actually trying to answer by the whole project? And if you are able to answer it, is there a strategy to commercialize and integrate it with the clinical routine, or the output is just a publication? Then obviously there are many deep learning algorithms. Somebody was actually putting the question in the Q&A session that are you actually developing the new deep learning algorithms, or are you using the deep learning algorithms for different applications? And what is the commercial part of it, if that is the journey? But that question I also have, and that is the question we also ask a lot of teams. Now, the simple thing, I think this is the closing remark, and I will just close that with a simple experiment to you. I am a researcher working in the area of medical imaging with application of AI and ML, not a developer of AI and ML, user. But I think like a doctor because that is my basic training is. Somebody comes to me and say, I want to do this, blah, 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 and will deliver it. Now, let me show you a simple example how a doctor will think. Pranita, can you wave your hand like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Shashank, can you wave your hand like this? No, unmute your mic and wave your hand so that your screen will come. Okay. Say something. Yeah, so that your images, just wave again. Okay. Same thing, Professor Seti.
Okay.
Just say something and yeah, wave.
Yeah. Okay.
So all of you have noticed me and Professor Seti both are not using any background. Shashank and Pranita are using the background, and me and Shashank, Amit, when wave hand, our hand is crystal clear. When Pranita and Shashank are waving their hand, just wave it again, Pranita, and say something.
Yeah. Hello. Hello.
Yeah. You see, the edge detection of her face as well as hand is not sufficient enough to actually project the data on screen. And you want me to believe you can do an image processing to save a human life. Simplest example with the simplest experiment. Now, a realistic academician accept the limitation, what it is dealing with. Try to fine tune what I can deliver best to the clinical community with the limitation I have in hand. And live in the real world, I am dealing with lives. It's a double-edged sword. For all the BTech students, they come to me, sir, I want to work in AI ML. Can you give me a project? Yes, but you have to accept it is not a solution. It's a tool. It's just a screwdriver. You can use it to open the screw or you can use it to beat somebody. It is a double-edged sword. Thank you.
Got it. So if we can also have closing remark from Professor Seti and Shashank. I mean, we already are about 5:10, so if we could do that, yeah, quickly.
Thank you. I think a lot has already been said by Professor Mehdirata and Shashank. I just want to say that it is, in spite of all its limitations, it's a very exciting field. Just be realistic, just try to be humble and not think that AI can solve all the problems. It's the usability and the context in which it will be used that is very important. So, get experts from different fields, relevant fields, and form a multifunctional team. Just AI is not enough. That's the only addition that I will make.
Okay. I think everything has been covered. One thing is not covered. If you want to work on the data that I have showed, come work with us. Here's the email. Mail me up. We are hiring everywhere. AI scientists, engineers. Thanks.
Just quickly, one point from my side is that if you have any queries related to these grant programs, please do write to us on sign_big@sine.org. We'll be happy to help you about writing your application, fine tuning it. And we'll also share our experiences with you about this grant, where Professor Amit Mehdirata also share his experience, how this evaluation process happens. So we can also share our experience with you as well. So with these points, I think it's already 5:10 and we are towards the end of the session. So with this, I would like to thank our today's guest speakers. For covering this particular thing, AI tool from all the aspects. We started with translational research, and then challenges into the translational research and clinical application, then regulatory framework, patentability, then the importance of data. We have covered it almost from all the angles, and from the industrial point of view, from Sasank has given so much inputs and shared his experiences with us. So key here is to work with your clinical partner closely to understand the gap and all. And please, work. If you have any queries, you can write to us. You can write to our experts here as well. So with that, I would like to thank all our speakers today. Thank you so much for your valuable time and putting so much, efforts in collating all these points together and having discussion, discussing with us even prior to this session and guiding our, audience here. So thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our participant here today, audience. Thank you for attending this session. And please, we'll be uploading the video recording of the session on the YouTube link. If you would like to refer to any pointers which we have discussed here, please do write to us in case of any queries you have. And thank you. And have a great weekend. Thank you.